Hello and good afternoon. I'm Katie Hirsch, Director of the Halsey Institute of Contemporary Art at the College of Charleston. Welcome to our Artist Talk with Dyani White Hawk on the occasion of her new exhibition, Hear Her. Regrettably, due to high COVID case counts, we are conducting this talk virtually. And for those of you watching in real time, we will have a question and answer session after our conversation. Please send in any questions you may have using the text box below this video. Send them in at any time and I will share them with Dyani at the end of our conversation. I'd like to take a moment to thank our Halsey Institute members. We could not bring exhibitions like Dyani's to Charleston without your support. Thank you for helping us to advance our mission of bringing adventurous artists and ideas from around the world right here to Charleston. If you're not a member but would like to be one, make sure to check out halsey.cfc.edu/join or contact us for more information. The exhibition Hear Her is sponsored in part by South Carolina Humanities, a not-for-profit organization inspiring, engaging, enriching South Carolinians with programs on literature, history, culture, and heritage. This event is also co-sponsored by the Center for Sustainable Development at the College of Charleston, which provides students with the opportunities and resources to engage in our community sustainably. We can define sustainability as the integration of social, economic, equity, and environmental systems, also known as the triple bottom line of sustainability. Addressing issues with these three pillars of sustainability equips students with sustainability literacy, giving one the knowledge to tackle 21st century issues. These systems are necessary in the construction of individual, institutional, community, regional, and planetary resilience. Dyani's work and today's talk highlights the critically important nature of using social, economic, and environmental systems to understand and ultimately solve 21st century problems. We hope that by participating in this event, you will have more resources to advocate for equitable, fair solutions to the issues facing Native peoples today. If you are a College of Charleston student, we would like to ask you to sign in virtually. We have a Google Doc linked right below this video, so please do so there. And I'm now pleased to introduce our guest for today's talk. Dyani White Hawk is a visual artist and independent curator based in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Dyani earned an MFA from the University of Wisconsin-Madison and a BFA from the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe, New Mexico. She served as gallery director and curator for the All My Relations Gallery in Minneapolis from 2011 to 2015. Support for Dyani's work has included a very recent 2021 Anonymous Was a Woman Award, a 2019 United States Artist Fellowship in Visual Art, and a 2014 Joan Mitchell Foundation Painters and Sculptors Grant, only a few among many notable mentions. Her work is in the collections of the Museum of Modern Art, Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art, the Smithsonian's National Museum of the American Indian, again, to name only very few among many. Dyani's exhibition, Hear Her, opened yesterday at the Halsey Institute and is on view through February 26th. And as a reminder, the Halsey Institute is open Monday through Saturday from 11 to 4 and Thursdays until 7 p.m. Dyani's work in Hear Her, as in all of her work, highlights the histories and diverse traditions of Native peoples. The exhibition includes two bodies of work, the 8-channel video installation Listen and the photography installation I Am Your Relative. Welcome, Dyani.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here with you today.
I'm happy to be here with you too, virtually, in person, however we may be together. I'm happy we're here together.
Yeah, we'll make it work.
We'll make it work. Well, I got to pass through the exhibition on my way into my office from where I'm joining this talk, and there were so many people out there. I should have told you this before. I'm springing this on you now. It's a surprise. There were some more people that I've seen in the space on a Saturday morning coming in than I have in a long time. So it was really moving
wow.
to see people at almost every monitor when I came in. So I just want to let you
Oh,
know that's happening outside right now.
that's so good to hear.
It really is. So a great way to start our talk. Those of you watching who haven't yet seen the exhibition, since it just opened yesterday, again, you have through February 26th to come and see it. And we'll be giving you a sneak peek through some stills and also a trailer for that video installation Listen, which we'll watch together here in a little bit. Thank you so much for joining us, Dyani. I'm so excited to talk to you.
Thank you.
My first question, I have a question about really the reception to your work. I was talking about this with some of our docents who came in yesterday for a tour of the exhibition to prep them to talk to others about it. And you know, your work across the board, and especially here in these two bodies of work at the Halsey Institute, and urges viewers to be conscious of the lack of representation of Native people, and to encourage awareness, as you've called it. I like the chasm of knowledge between histories lived and histories taught. And in recent years, there has been a push to become more aware that the history as we learn it is a narrative. Things get put in, things get left out. There have been a lot more conversation around this as a reality. And your work provides what I think is a very accessible route to self-reflection about how we've learned and how we understand the history of this land that we live on. And I'm curious about how your work has been received in different geographies and by different audiences, because in our conversation, we were talking about that sometimes there can come with this self-reflection feelings of embarrassment that you believed this a narrative all along, and that you've been believing something false, or you've been believing something hurtful, something violent. And so I'm curious about how you've seen your work received by different audiences in that light.
That's a good question. And I think that, like, the first thing that came to mind when you said that is when we feel that way, you know, embarrassed or hurt, shame comes with that. You know, we feel a sense of shame, and then we might want to recoil from that shame. And I think sometimes the follow up to that is like defensiveness, right? Like that wasn't me. That's not how I feel. That's not, you know, it's not the person I want to be, right? But the reality is that we're all products of our environment. And the other reality is that, you know, it's been the colonization and, you know, attempted assimilation, termination. We can go down the list of history and governmental policies against Native people is a reality. And so the way that history has been taught and continues to be taught in our public education system, which is what we all have access to, has not taught the full history of this land base, and has especially not taught and confronted the full history of, when they talk about American history, they talk about it from colonization forward, as if there wasn't anything happening here before people showed up. Before other people showed up. And it's, you know, I mean, it's curated that way, right? And so, you know, to some extent, I think we really have to understand that like, you can't control a lot of that until you get to an age where you can, right? Until you get to like a stage of maturity and an ability to start to look deeper and think deeper and think critically about the narrative that's been presented to you. And so I'm really glad to hear you say that it feels accessible, because they're really hard conversations. But I really do want it to feel accessible, because if people's first reaction is feeling defensive, then they may not take in what I think is really important information for human growth. You know, I really think that we need to learn how to face our truths in all of it, the good, the bad, the ugly, because that's in facing those things and taking them on and owning them and understanding them, I believe is absolutely necessary for healing and for growth, to find better models of how to, be relatives on a shared land base, how to love and nurture one another as opposed to, commit acts of violence towards one another. So it needs to be accessible. It can't be, for me, I think there are different personalities, different tactics, and different roles. For me, it's really important that the accessibility part is there, and that an understanding of our shared humanity is recognized, and honored before we dig into the tough stuff. So as far as reception, I haven't heard any terrible pushback or anything necessarily mean or derogative about the work. People are generally pretty grateful and kind, and express, they tend to express gratitude, and hopefully that means that it's working, and that folks have an opportunity to just think a little deeper, because that's all I'm really asking people to do, is to take a moment away from the narrative that we've been fed, and take a moment to look at the circumstances and the facts around us, and be like, does that feel like the full truth? Because it's really not. And in order to move towards a better situation, for everybody, we've got to be able to face those truths. So generally people are pretty kind. I think that resistance maybe comes from more from a lack of embracing, or a lack of support, and I don't want to say that in a way that sounds like I don't get support for my work, because that's not true. I do get support for my work, but I also feel like I notice moments when it's not there. I notice moments when it's not held up as something equal to some of my counterparts in the field. So I feel like more often it comes in that way.
Well, I think your work does open up a place for people to self-reflect on all of these issues that you're touching on. It's a hard thing for somebody to say, I've been taught incorrectly, or I've learned incorrectly, because, as you say, that does draw up feelings of shame. And that was a really interesting conversation we were having yesterday. But as I said, I think it is that accessibility that pulls through. And one thing I really enjoy about your work, this work here in Hear Her at the Halsey Institute, is that your thesis, as it were, is delivered really quickly. Like, it's a very quick, impactful kind of punch, is the way that I've been describing it. Like, it's just it's fast and hard. And I think the media is something that really helps that, because the two bodies of work, as and I will show you guys, don't worry, I will show you some stills, but the video, watching video, that's something that everybody has this, so-called visual literacy to be able to do. We all know how to watch a video and listen to the audio from the video. So I think automatically that's perhaps for many people less intimidating than another form. And likewise, I Am Your Relative, they're life-size portraits of women, and the way that you have them installed, the way we have them hung, they're in your space. And I think that likewise makes them, it's automatically a different relationship just between your body and the work. And I think that it's the media here that automatically takes away that kind of first threshold fear of stepping into the work. But I think maybe I wasn't going to do it until later, but maybe we should. We're talking about it so much without showing people. So maybe before we move forward, I'll take a moment to show a few images from the Halsey Institute. This is the, it can't be captured all in one lens at the moment. We just opened yesterday. We haven't had it professionally photographed. So this is our internal staff iPhone pictures for this purpose. But this is the installation, I Am Your Relative, a collaboration with Tom Jones. And here are images so that you can see them all together. And we'll come back and talk about this in just a moment. I want to first talk about Listen, which, as I mentioned, is an 8-channel video installation in the Chalsty Gallery, the large space in the Halsey Institute. We've got 8 monitors running concurrently, and each, I won't explain it. I'll let Dyani explain it, but I want to give you some images, some stills from the work here. And we have a trailer that we will share, but first, Dyani, I'd like you to just give a short introduction to this body of work for our viewers.
Okay, so let's see here, where to start. The work is titled Listen, and it's 8 to upwards of 24 monitors, as we're still working on the piece, and it will continue to grow. But it can only be installed minimally with 8 monitors. And it's meant to be an immersive experience. So in each of the monitors is 5 to 6 minute video loops. And in each video is an individual Native woman speaking her indigenous language on her homelands. And then there's B-roll footage of the land itself and sounds from the land. And that footage is layered within images of her. It's both visually and audibly layered so that you get a sense of the geography. And it's very specific. They're all filmed today. So these are all, women from today that are on their homelands as they exist today. But you get an introduction to 8 different indigenous languages as tied to individual women and the geography from which they come from. No translation is provided on what they're speaking to, and but there's exhibition text. So the didactics ask each person to think about how many languages you could identify by sound. So if you were to sit in a cafe or walk down the street in metropolitan area or something, and if you just sit and take a moment and go down the list of how many languages you could identify just by sound. It's pretty extensive, how many languages we've been exposed to that we can just, even if you don't know a single word from that language, you can be like, oh, that's that person speaking German, that's Italian, French, Spanish, what Chinese sounds like, Japanese sounds like, you could, for yourself and, wherever you live, you may be around different populations of folks where languages are more commonly spoken. So it can be upwards of 20 plus languages for the average American adult. And then the didactic asks, how many indigenous languages, how many languages from this land base could you identify by sound? And for most folks, within mainstream America, that number will be very small. And for a lot of people, it will be none. Some might have, might be able to identify 1 or 2, but they're going to be very seldom cases when it's going to be more than that. And then it asks folks to think about, it basically, that text asking people, think about how many languages you can identify by sound, and then think about how many languages you can identify by sound that are actually from here. And it gives you a moment to have an opportunity of epiphany, that how profound it is that most folks won't be able to identify just by sound the languages that are actually from this land base. Because all of those languages in that longer previous list are languages from other continents. And it's a fairly simple thought, but it provides a moment of profound understanding of how wildly impactful colonization truly has been. And then at the same time, it gives folks a moment to be able to be introduced to at least a small sampling of Indigenous languages and specific women and the geography from which they come. So then you can travel the space and be introduced to the sounds and cadences of this sampling of languages. And we don't provide the translations for what each women are talking about because it's not meant to be, they're not language teaching tools. They're not videos that are meant for you to provide access to the language or culture, or for there to be like a figuring out, but it's an introduction to the sounds of this land base. And so, yeah, maybe we should watch the trailer now.
Yeah, we've teased people a lot if they haven't been in to see it, and we do. Thank you so much. I can't wait to talk about it, but let's go ahead and show them. We have a 2-minute trailer that we'll share with you here. We also do have a link to the trailer on the Halsey Live page below this video.
Eshkwag kibwa manio mikiziwag bimasegma meswema gibiasha going gibiashasi
ya kutsan kutsquer kem kutsan kutsquer katamom matakanave mvavak yats kuts konyedik nyavi anyevaik nyavi kmank
Yutki Bakui Menta Naku Pimenta Ituma Kinta Luling Iwa Bunta Kin Wazokina Inikaraki Hahamanunga Hingare Unchi Kakara He anchara ha hemaninka hingare. He only had a chalk shopping there.
You know, Macam,
Kikara
Juliaman, Bashishilan, Yawis Quipum, Loyasla, Opim Ryokansaman, Pokuyukum, Kramashoda, or Yada Shitman Short, Kupanya Sonit.
Kneel down from what he got. Dane ho, dini so, ni wat gwenos, ni wagaya heo, dane ho.
Don't touch up enough. Yushki at Naku, Yushki, Chichek Hena, you happy day. Hena, you watching Bo, Toksta, I care what you get day. You may talk you as.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I think that gives you a sense of what you can experience in watching and looking listen in the galleries. So Dyani, my first question is kind of the most basic question I can ask about the work, which is, how did this project originate?
So your exhibition includes this video installation and a photo installation, but I'm predominantly a painter. My practice has been founded in predominantly beadwork and painting. So I tend to make, two-dimensional works that are works that focus strongly on the history of Lakota abstraction and abstract easel painting, and the ways that those are inextricably intertwined histories, and how that has been underplayed or ignored in the way that art history is taught. And a lot of my work comes from that space, from putting a highlight and a focus on the contributions of Indigenous people and Native women specifically to the history of abstraction on this land base, and to their legacies and contributions to art history on this land base at large, and making efforts to push back and encourage people to think about our art historical narratives in a more holistic, inclusive, and truthful way. And oftentimes one of my biggest challenges when I meet with curators, I have curatorial visits, or I'm applying to an opportunity or something of the sort, is very few people are actually studied in the full history of this country. Very few people are familiar with Native history and the way that that plays out in our lives today. Very few people are exposed to contemporary Native communities and people, and really understand that full story. And so often when I'm presenting my work and when I'm talking to a curator that's not been educated in that way, I have to start from scratch and tell a whole history lesson before they can catch up and understand what we're talking about in the work today. And it's totally exhausting. And so it's a huge hurdle for Native artists, because people don't have the context, the already built-in library and understanding. So when they look at the piece, it's harder for them to decode it. So oftentimes I think people, especially in jury panels and things like that, a lot of folks aren't going to be able to have those aha moments when they're looking at a work that they might have with somebody else's, that they're familiar with the history that might be embedded and coded into a piece, right? So a lot of times people might miss that information because they've not been exposed to it, right? Or they might miss how profound a position or an idea is because they don't have the foundation to build off of. It's new, it's abstract, it's I don't understand, or it's not even embedded as important yet because they've not been exposed to it, right? And so thinking about that, and so that that's an issue for Native artists, but the reality is that's an issue for Native people in any field and in their lives at large. So I was thinking about that, and I was thinking, I'm like, man, how do you address that? How do you begin? How do you even start? And as a person who's solo sitting in my studio wielding a paintbrush, how do I chip away at that chasm? I don't have control over the education system. Native people at large don't have control over the mainstream American public education system. We're more often than not excluded or wildly misrepresented. And so that task of having people even understand feels impossible. The task of fixing that feels so overwhelming, and it feels impossible. So in thinking about that in the studio, I was like, well, I don't have the ability to fix it. But maybe I could create some work that at least cued people into the fact that it exists. Maybe if I just presented a story that was hey, did you know? Maybe that's a start. And I didn't feel like I could do that through a painting. And so this video piece came from that line of questioning, and it came from trying to figure out, how do we even just express did you know Like, do you understand, and if not, here's a way for you to be introduced and have a moment, hopefully a moment of deep understanding of how pervasive colonization truly has been.
Yes, I mean, as I said, for me personally, I think you've succeeded, but that it is a piece that delivers. There's a lot put down very quickly when you view this work, and I've been thinking more about it too. So why language in particular?
Because it's absolutely absurd that most people have never heard the languages that are from this land base. I mean, that it's such a simple thought, but it's wild when you think about it. It's wild that people that live here and have lived their entire lives on this land base. I mean, every Native person, you can talk to any Native person you meet, you can ask them if they've had those moments where they meet someone and they're like, wow, you're the first Native person I've ever met. I mean, I was working as my PA appointment in grad school. I was the visiting artist coordinator and not coordinator, but helping with the program. And there was a woman from the East Coast who was in her late 60s, and I had to pick her up from the airport and, we talk and visit. And, even her, like, a traveling, successful, working artist was like, wow, you're the, first Native person I've ever met. Native people more often than not have met people that say, wow, I thought you guys were all gone. I thought you were all dead. People ask the most absurd, stupid questions about, and I'm sorry, that sounds negative and mean, but it's wild, like how much people don't know. And how deeply embedded the stereotypes, like how effective the stereotyping has been on the American public and their understanding and lack thereof of Native cultures and Native people. So I guess for me, language was a real introduction to an entire people, right? Living cultures, living people, a moment to introduce people to us in a way that honors who we are, the fact that we are whole and whole cultures, whole peoples, not just people with an identity. You know what I mean? It's living, breathing cultures that existed before colonization, before the idea of the United States of America, which is why in the language and the didactics, you'll see that I refer to this land base over and over again. And people sometimes get confused and they're like, what do you mean by that? And I'm like, I don't really want to say in America or in the United States of America, because our as Native people, our relationship with this land base predates that notion and predates those imposed borders. And so for me, the introduction to Native, living Native women, contemporary Native women, and for folks to be able to hear the languages and understand that those are tied to living human beings and specific regions and geographies, felt like, I guess, a as whole of an introduction as you can do in a 5 to 6 minute clip.
I think too that is again part of the accessibility too. At the same, language. It's something we're using right now. We take for granted, and I think it is a very self-centered notion to think that even the issue of English speaking, right? Like that's not, we don't have an official federal language. States are trying to get language recognized, but this issue of language as politicized, I think is an interesting layer to weave into that work as well. But one thing I really like about Listen as well is this introduction of multiple languages and the fact that they are distinct languages. They're not dialects. These are distinct languages, which I think is another misconception perhaps that people have. And I think the decisions you've made about you and your collaborator, Rizal Benali, the decisions you've made as well to include the images of the land, further kind of grounding it in again, in a language that I think people are ripe to receive, right? This is land that they are recognized, that they live on. And as you say, that we can't recognize the language we can't name, much less recognize the language of the land we live on. I'm curious what you yourself learned about language and in the making of this work, or what did you, I guess since I'm so focused on language itself as a medium, what did you learn about language in the making of this work?
It's beautiful. I haven't thought too, I haven't dug into that questioning for myself yet, but my first reaction of it's beautiful is the reality is, as Native people, even we are disconnected from that history and from a real access to cultures outside of our own, unless we travel a lot or like attend tribal colleges or have there's some of us that have an opportunity to interact with more Native people across the continent, but not everybody has that access either. So there's a lack of access even within our own communities too, and so what's been really neat is for me and Rizal to be able to travel to these different communities and some of them we're very familiar with and they're the tribes adjacent to us, and so it's very familiar. And Native people, the Native community is very intertwined in small community, and so oftentimes within a specific location, you might have a lot of relationships, across tribes that are in close proximity. So in some cases, they're languages that are really familiar to us. And other instances, they're folks that we haven't gotten to have, an immersive relationship with. So there's been times where we're hearing the language for the first time too. And that's a beautiful, cross-cultural exchange and relationship building, and it's amazing. So what else have I learned about languages? There's things that I've thought about more that I knew. It's not necessarily a new epiphany, but I guess having more firsthand experience, the language retention is varied across the across the land, because colonization has impacted us in different ways, especially geographically. Like the settlers hit the East Coast first, so like the coasts have been really, really hit hard, right? And then on the interior, it's of the continent, it's different, and then different areas depending on how much assimilation efforts were successful or super prevalent in super areas. The language retention really varies depending on the history of that space and their interaction with settlers and settlers' intentions and efforts to eradicate language. So some tribes still have a much stronger hold on language and have more language speakers than others. So that's something that, we've had the opportunity to talk about amongst ourselves a lot more in our adventures through, traveling and filming, and, seeing that real time and understanding it real time has been, a learning for us. Even if you know it, sometimes you can know a concept, but it can often be abstract until you're physically present, experiencing that reality or experiencing that concept. And so that's been interesting. There's 573 federally recognized tribes yet today. And you might have to remind me, but on the didactic, I think it said there's only 175 or so languages that are still living languages. And that's a surprisingly small number compared to 573. And then, a lot of those languages are at risk too. So, wrapping my head around those realities is a learning as well.
Truly, and you bring up the great point, because the Halsey Institute commissioned Dyani and her collaborator Rizal to create a work for Listen featuring the Catawba language spoken in upstate South Carolina. And I know this installment differed from the other works in that the Catawba people did lose their last fluent native speaker a few decades ago. But members of the tribe are working on a language revitalization project. And that this was also the first, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but that it was the first time using kind of completely outside connections to meet the speaker in the video. And aside from, I got to be privy to conversations via Zoom between you and members of the Catawba tribe, where you discuss some of these issues about language loss and revitalization, and talking about the differences of geography on the coast. And again, I mean, that was something, when you say it, of course, but not something that I had thought about, probably because, as a human being, and we're all narcissistic, and I hadn't stepped out to consider how that geography impacted the retention.
Well, and again, it's not taught.
Right, it's not taught. But I'm curious about how, aside from all those other points that you bring up, I have so many questions. We need 7 hours. I realize I need to turn to some submitted questions here in just a moment. But that my last question was about how being connected to a speaker and to a tribe that perhaps wasn't adjacent, at least contemporary, at least today in contemporary times, how that impacted filming, or how that impacted the process, or what that experience was like.
Well, every filming experience that we've had has been beautiful. We feel really blessed to be able to do this work. So my friend Rizal Benali, she's Dene and Lakota cinematographer, and she's the person that I asked to help me with this work, because I'm not filmmaker. So when the work came to mind, I was like, man, I need a partner. I need somebody who this is their medium, and so I thought about Rizal immediately. We went to IAI together, and as Lakota people, I know that she comes from the same set of teachings and values, and that she would approach the work in guided by those values in the way that I do. And then she's also Dene, and my in-laws are all Dene, so we've got that commonality too. So our connections, like the first people that we went out and filmed, all came through like her and I's network of people that we are either related to or friends with or went to school with, or some sort of direct down the line connection from between her and I. But and then, you know, as we needed to collect more languages and you know, reach out into geographies that we haven't been to yet, you know, we'd start reaching out beyond. So like the last one, you know, we just got done doing a Southern Ute filming session with a wonderful woman there, and that came through a Facebook call. Shout out, you know, hey, we need someone in the Colorado area. The crazy thing is it still came back to connections to us. Like the connection to that person still came from people that both her and I knew, which is pretty amazing. But it's been such a blessing, because I think every single woman that we've filmed with has understood how valuable of an exercise this is. One, as Native people, like we're all like taught that relationship building is really important, you know, and so when we're working with people that, you know, have a similar set of guiding values, and that, you know, it's beautiful to build those relationships outside of our immediate communities or adjacent communities, or, you know, get to network and have a friendship with somebody, you know, in a state that you might not be at, you know, consistently, but now you have that connection there, and that's a really beautiful and valued thing. But it also, like for all of these speakers, you know, it gives them an opportunity to be seen and to be honored for who they are. You know, it's really important to us. You know, we're paying them for their time, but we're also gifting them because that's our own cultural protocol, and making sure that we're doing our best to honor, you know, what they're gifting all of us, right? And so we feel so honored to be able to work with each one of them, and to be able to you know, celebrate and cherish what they have to share, that they are language speakers, that they can share that with us. And, you know, some of the elderly women that we filmed, some of our elders, they, you know, we don't dictate what they speak about. Each one, I tell them, I want you to speak about what's important to you, knowing that your community members may be able to understand you. That's all you need to think about. And that this time and space is for whatever you want to share. For everybody else, it's an opportunity for them to get introduced to your language, what it sounds like. But you speak about what you want to speak about. And a couple of those elders spoke about their experiences in boarding school, when they were reprimanded, when they were punished or shamed for speaking their language. And now here we are coming and gifting them and paying them and giving them an opportunity to celebrate that, you know? And so it's been such a gift for us to be able to do it. Each time we walk away, just kind of like, like emotional and blown away. And as you know, we've broken into tears more than once while we're doing this. And this is just, it's a really beautiful experience to be able to go out and build those relationships and honor these women and honor the gifts that they still carry.
I can't imagine what it must be like, and the anticipation that you'll get to continue it, because I know you're growing this series. So I'm like excited for you to continue that, and excited for me and for all of us to continue to benefit from your work on that project.
Thank you.
I do have to turn away from my own questions, even though I have about 17 more to some submitted questions.
Okay.
But it is, the first one is actually in line with what we've been discussing, and there is a whole other body of work that we haven't discussed yet, which is I Am Your Relative, but there is a question about it. I could see somebody must have asked from. But this first question is, what is the working process like that goes into creating a video? You know, how are the speakers selected? What's the collaboration process like on set?
So I think I spoke to that a little bit already. So like the first videos, you know, we really tapped into friends and family. One of the women is my husband's grandma. Another is a really dear friend of Roselle's. Another is a previous faculty member, now really good friend, is his mom. Another is one of our brothers that we went to Haskell Indian Nations with, the first tribal college my husband and I attended, is one of his best friends that's now like our family, our brother, and it's one of his young women in his language program. And so, you know, we reached out to our connections, and that's really how that came through. And I just got done talking about what it's like. It's amazing. And, you know, it's really important for me that that it's women for a couple different reasons. One, because there is a very direct correlation between violence against women and violence against the land. And there has also been an ignoring of what women have contributed and continue to contribute to cultural continuity, because so often when there has been books written, video, you know, movies made or whatever by non-Native people about Native people, it's been done through the lens of patriarchy. So they go to the men, right? And we're focusing on women for this, not because we don't value what our male relatives have contributed and have to continue to contribute, because we do deeply, but we also recognize that there's been an undervaluing and under recognition of women. And so for us, this is a way to kind of start to bring a stronger balance into that. And so it was important to me that it was a female filmmaker that I worked with, you know, Native female filmmakers. So we laugh a lot. That's what it's like. You know, we have a really good time. We make sure that that the people that we're working with feel very comfortable. We're building friendships while we're doing this project, and you know, that's what's important to us, is that, you know, we're not just going out there to like grab the language and go. You know, we're doing our best to honor what they have to gift, and we're just kind of grateful to be doing it.
And visitors to the Halsey Institute actually have the unique opportunity to see behind the scenes of that process, because we do have footage showing in our video cavern of UN Rizal making the Catawba video with Becky. I was watching it yesterday, and I saw you gifting her food, and I saw you guys laughing, and so it's really neat to see behind that process.
Oh, that's good. I haven't even seen that footage yet. Yeah, and then on that trip we worked with Shireen Pilar Gonzalez as well, who's another young Native filmmaker. She's from New Mexico area.
Well, we'll look forward to hearing people's reactions to seeing that as well.
Yeah.
I have another question. I love that your work has an immediate, unambiguous message, and yet at the same time, you also ask for your audience to sit with and experience not knowing by not providing translations. In listening and not knowing, our attention is on the sound and texture of these languages, as opposed to the transmission of information. Have you considered the benefits for your audience of being submitted to not knowing, perhaps a humbling experience, and also has sound here maybe taken the place of painting for you?
Yes, and yes. I thought about it a lot. I mean, it's intentional. It's very intentional, not providing the interpretation. And part of that is because there's also been this, how do you express this? Through the acts of colonization, folks have really come to feel like there's a right or an ownership, you know, or ability to own or have access to Native cultures, Native people, land, art, all these things. It has just been like take, and it continues today, right? And so there's, there's a pretty natural reaction to that, to feel quite protective of what we do have. And there's also just the reality that not everybody should have access to everything. That is not meant to say the people that watch these videos should not have access to these videos or to the languages. That's not for me to decide. Because those are not, like, I'm a visitor when I'm in other tribal nations, when I'm working with other tribal people, that, that I'm not from that culture. I'm not from that tribe. I don't have the right to give away anything from those spaces. And so, we're also, we're very upfront. We explain the project at length before we film with anybody, so that they really understand and that they feel really good about whatever it is that they want to offer, right? And that's all directed by and comes from them. But we also explain to people, we're not giving an interpretation, because it's not about giving access to the information about what the people are sharing. It's about an introduction to the languages, and really having that moment for quiet reflection and epiphany of what you have not been introduced to, for that chasm of knowledge, that lack of knowing. And I want people to sit with that and to hear the languages and to be just simply introduced to them. Because oftentimes when we're first introduced to languages, you're not getting a direct translation of everything somebody is saying, like you're learning with the ways that we understand so many languages. I can't like walk into a space where they're speaking another language and know exactly what everybody's saying, even if I know what language it is, right? I want people to have that moment. I want people to start to be introduced to the sounds of this land base, and there's also like this deep American need for I want this thing to be interpreted for me, and I and I want to get it and walk away. Like in museums are so bad at that, right? Like especially within like for Native culture, they give you a little museum didactic, and this is what this means, and now you walk away and you totally understand. And I think it's complete BS, because oftentimes, like, people they desire an interpretation and an understanding. So oftentimes folks will ask, Native people today, to talk about or think about, like, I've had moments where museums wanted me to look at collections and make, interpretation or talk about those things. And I'm like, well, I could talk about certain things, but I am not the human that created these. And so I cannot speak to the specificity of that person's journey, that person's inspiration, that person's relationships, that person, and all of that is embedded into a work. Just as it's embedded into a work today, it was embedded into works then, right? And so we have this need of like knowing, of having this definitive, this is what this is how you read it, this is how you interpret it, now you walk away enlightened and you know the truth. I think that's a mistruth, right? And so there's also a piece in this where I want people to feel that, like that person said, that discomfort of not knowing, and knowing that that's okay. Like, it's okay for you not to know, yes. Right? That's all right, and that there's nothing wrong with that, but we can still appreciate the beauty without knowing a word-to-word interpretation.
Yes, exactly. And there's so much you said there that I really wish we could continue to unpack. The least of which is how exhausting it is to be asked to be a representative for people across space and time, because you are both Native people, but perhaps from very different lived experiences, not to mention different time periods, as you said. But I do have a question that was submitted. I do want to make sure and ask everybody's submitted question about I Am Your Relative, which I'm showing here, hanging, and the time has really flown, and we haven't talked about this work, but this is a large scale photography installation a collaboration between you and photographer Tom Jones,
Mhm.
hanging in our South Gallery. And as I said before, this is just to give you a sense of scale, that these are life-size images. And the front has a sentence that has these t-shirts that says, "I am more than your desire, more than your fantasy, more than a mascot, ancestral love, prayer, sacrifice. I am your relative." And on the back of the t-shirt identifies the tribes from which the tribes that the women are affiliated with.
Mhm.
I love how this occupies the viewer space. I said this at the beginning, in a different way than the works hanging on the wall simply cannot. But the questions actually is about the women and what they're wearing. So that each of the women wears very distinctive clothing and accessories with her t-shirt. Were these selected by the subjects?
Yes. So, but I did tell them I wanted them to wear their ribbon skirts or their skirts, but and their moccasins. But knowing, I mean, I already knew, I didn't have to ask for this part, but I knew that in doing that, there would be different tribal representation through that. So that's really what's happening is, these women are from diverse but intersected tribal connections, because like the young lady in the I Am t-shirt, that's my daughter. So I made that skirt and her moccasins.
Wow.
But her moccasins are, they're Lakota moccasins, and the skirt we made for her to go to prom. So it's, it's a, you're not going to necessarily look at the skirt and be like, that's a Lakota ribbon skirt, because it's, it's a contemporary take on the lineage of ribbon skirts and dresses. But you get to see a little bit more of the tribal specificity in her moccasins. Next to her is our really dear friend Sasha, who is Dakota, and that's reflected in the Dakota floral work on her skirt, and on her moccasins as well, also made by a really amazing Dakota beadworker. And then after that is our really dear friend and one of my studio assistant extraordinaire, and one of my best friends. Her name's Jenny Kapperman, and she's Ojibwe, and that's the skirt and moccasins that she made, and it's very much representative of Ojibwe floral work. And then our friend next to her, our dear friend Leah, is both Dene and Dakota, and who she is as a Dakota woman is very, very much reflected in the style of her leggings and moccasins, her skirt, and her earrings. And then my sister-in-law is next to her, and she is San Carlos Apache, Dene, and Quetzan, and that is a Quetzan style skirt. And then she's got her Dene style moccasins on, so that, is as specific to who she is. And then our dear friend Kaina, who is the same age as my daughter, and we all play traditional lacrosse together. And Kaina is now a studio assistant as well. She is Honduran and Ho-Chunk, and her skirt is very much representative of Ho-Chunk ribbon work, as is her moccasins, and her earrings are all Ho-Chunk specific. So I knew in asking these women to bring their things that they would, represent the, cultural diversity, even though they're all ribbon skirts, right? Or they're all, skirts that are specific to their tribe. So it reflects their individuality, and yet it also reflects, a common cultural practice or language in the use of moccasins and skirts and earrings and beautiful, beautiful adornment.
They're beautiful. You bring up another, I'll circle back with one of my questions here, which is that collaboration seems to be so key to your work, to both of the projects in Hear Her with Listen and I Am Your Relative, and then here collaborations with the women, and with collaborations with the women in lists that are featured in Listen as well. And so it seems to be kind of essential. So can you speak to this desire to collaborate and what it brings to the work across the board?
Yeah, for sure. So one, I'm also not a photographer. So when this piece came to mind, I had to find another, friend and colleague to work with. So Tom Jones, he was, well, he still is, photo faculty at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, which is where I went to grad school. So he was, and we just struck up a really strong friendship when I was going there. And then he was on my MFA committee as well. And now we're still really good friends, and we're going to be colleagues because I'm going to be teaching there in the fall as well. Yeah, so I haven't talked about that publicly yet, but it's it's coming soon. So yeah. And but his mom is also the Ho Chunk woman that's in Listen. So that speaks to those community ties and connections, and his mom and my mom are friends, and all of the women in I Am Your Relative are family. They're either direct blood, family through marriage, or family through community, in the way that we build kinship throughout our communities. And speaking about the issues that are represented in both the bodies of work. So I Am Your Relative speaks to the epidemic of violence against Native women, girls, and Two-Spirit relatives. And Listen, is speaking to, asking people to see and understand a greater truth about the history of this land base, and to see and to recognize both the bodies of work ask people to recognize Native people as contemporary real human beings that aren't mythical figments of their imagination or what's fed to us in mass media, right? So they ask people to recognize our individual humanity, and then individual women that are important parts of their communities, and then our greater society as well, right? And their value and their worth in that. And I can't speak to those things by myself. It wouldn't do any good. It wouldn't be real. It wouldn't be honest. Like it would be a farce. It would be arrogant too. These are issues that are way bigger than a single human being. So it only seems. I mean, out of necessity, there's collaboration. Because of the mediums. I'm not a filmmaker, and I'm not going to try to pretend to be one. And I'm not a photographer, but I know really amazing people that are, right? And so it gives me, these projects gave me an opportunity to work with people I really value, and to work with people whose practices I really respect. And it makes the work so much richer because we're building larger relationships, right? Which is so important, in Native communities and beyond. I mean, just building relationships and building friendships is I don't know, I guess I feel like what we should be doing, right? So yeah, they're bigger issues than an individual person. So it has to be collaboration. It has to be multiple voices.
Well, I think that's an especially prescient way of operating at this moment in time as well. And I think also that sentiment about building bridges and building relationships, I know, is drawn throughout your work as well in all media. And I think it's kind of the perfect sentiment for us to unfortunately wind down on. Because we've talked about so many things that can feel heavy, that can feel fascinating, but I think leaving on that feeling of hope that through this work we can build bridges not just to people, but build bridges to knowledge, build bridges
Mhm.
to a better future where this is discussed without feeling shame, where this is brought into the larger narrative. I think your work does exactly that. So that's the sentiment that I think is a perfect place for us to jump off on. I know I have so many more questions still. I say that, but it's been really a pleasure to learn more about your work. And we are hopeful that perhaps you might be able to travel, and we might be able to FET and celebrate together in late February if it seems advisable to do so. But thank you so much for sharing this conversation, building a bridge here with me today.
Yeah.
And for our viewers to learn more about your work. And it's just been my pleasure. I've been so excited to talk with you about this work here in the exhibition. So I thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
And I want to remind viewers that you do have the opportunity just open. So you have through February 26th to come and hear her at the Halsey Institute of Contemporary Art. We have free staff-led tours every Saturday at 2 p.m. You can request a free tour at any time, but there's a standing staff tour every Saturday. So we're pleased to be able to speak with you more about the issues raised by Dyani's work. And if you have more questions raised by this talk, we can gather together and talk about them here. And I'm sure Dyani wouldn't be opposed to me emailing her a couple questions and bringing them back to you here in one of those tours. So thank you so much, Dyani, and thank you everybody for joining us today.
Yes, thank you, Katie. Thank you, Brian, and everybody at the Halsey. I really appreciate your support and your kindness. And thanks to everybody that tuned in today and that will take the time to go see the exhibit. I appreciate you all.
Thank you. We'll see you in the galleries.